The Talkin Tide podcast is back for the 2024 season. Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News, along with Travis Reier. Good to be back after a pretty lengthy hiatus, Travis, but here we are on the cusp of some football here in 2024. Looking forward to it as always.
You got it, man. It feels good to be back. I mean, how many years is this now for Talkin Tide? Is this 8, 9, something like that?
8 or 9, and maybe 3 or 4 iterations, right? Couple of different networks, a little stretch as an independent. I'm sure we've got some listeners that are way backs from year one, and hats off to them because they've had to follow. They've had to figure out a way to follow on. We tried to make it easy as possible, though. I think we've done it.
The real ones remember the birth of instant analysis, though. That's the ones that really go back underneath the practice field lights all those years ago when we cranked that baby up. But no,
I still hear about that. I still hear about instant analysis from 2009, I guess. Well, no, 2007.
Yeah, 2007, 2008. A lot of it was that 2008 recruiting class, remember, with Julio and all those guys. And Nick would have the split practice at that time. He'd have the returning players maybe in the morning and then the new guys at night. So everybody would be staying up waiting on those practice reports. And we cranked that baby up all those years ago. I hear it too, but it's a lot of fun. It's great to be back. Man, we've got plenty to talk about, and we certainly appreciate everybody joining us here. And also, if you haven't subscribed to our channel here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on that notification bell. That way you get all of these shows and our other content as it drops right here. And also a like. We always are up for a thumbs up, man. And Chase is back from Paris covering the Olympic Games. What about it, Goodbread? What was your favorite event or sport or whatever it is? Did you get to cover breakdancing? Because
did not
cover right up your alley, I would have thought. Yeah.
No. Fortunately, I didn't get assigned to that. I probably covered 4 or 5 different sports all told, although I spent the vast majority of my time covering track and field. So the first few days on the job, they had me going everywhere. I did the women's mountain biking. I did rowing, kind of hit the gamut there those first few days. And then after about maybe 4 or 5 days, they kind of settled me in with track and field, which is a big enough deal that you need more than one person on it. So I was working with Tyler Dragon of USA Today, who's a track and field savant. And we enjoyed it. Got to see that Noah Lyles 100 where he fell out with the COVID, and the women's relay where they came real close to setting a world record. So it was some kind of time, 21 days over there.
I mean, track and field when it comes to the summer games, that's marquee, when you think about events and the Summer Olympics. Now, what was the best thing you ate over there? Did you have snails? Did you
no negative
escargot?
Negative.
What did maybe a croissant, steak au pois?
Let me start with this. Culture is overrated. All right. We'll begin right there. Okay. But I did have a couple of phenomenal meals with the caveat there. The first, I went over there with my wife 4 days before I had to punch the clock so we could celebrate a 30th wedding anniversary.
Congrats.
Right? Yeah, thanks for that. So
medal for Michelle. No
doubt. No,
you talk about a gold medal.
Yeah, no doubt. So those 4 days I was there with Michelle, and we were just trying to take Paris in and enjoy ourselves. That's where all the good eating was. Once I punched the clock, you're so busy, you're pretty much eating street food on the run day in and day out. So I didn't have any memorable meals once the work started. But those 4 or 5 days I got in before I had to start covering the Olympics. Yeah, we hit we stayed in Versailles at a Waldorf Astoria, which had a Michelin-rated restaurant in the Waldorf.
Wow.
And so that has to be the number one, right? Had a 7 courser from a Michelin rated spot, Travis.
Yeah. Wow.
I told Michelle, don't show me the bill. I just had her sign. I didn't even look at it, Then it refused, but that was a fine meal. And we also hit a spot in Paris a couple days later called Le Relais, I think it was, de l'Entrecôte, that's famous for steak frites.
Yeah.
And
you go wrong with steak frites. I mean,
no, that was outstanding as well. So that covered it.
All right. Well, that's all I had, but we can go ahead and I guess get back to the regularly scheduled programming at this point.
No doubt. 2024 season upon us. Western Kentucky, Travis, as we record this podcast now, less than 2 weeks away. And Kalen DeBoer entering season 1, fall camp, just about in the books. That last scrimmage just got wrapped up this past Saturday. So they've got a few more practices left before they crank up game week. But going to be interesting to see how things shake out for Kalen DeBoer and this offense especially.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you too, your impressions, because we haven't talked really since all of this has gone into play and really sort of cemented itself. What have been your impressions of Kalen DeBoer on the job to this point? For me, it's been like a 180 from the Nick Saban experience, especially in terms of what we've done throughout the years in covering Alabama football. I haven't seen a football coach at Alabama maybe as accessible as Kalen has been. So he's been transparent in a lot of ways. He goes places Nick never would have dared. And that's not to say both ways can't work, because Kalen DeBoer's record to this point certainly speaks for itself. But just in terms of going from one regime to the next, it's about as different as I think you could experience.
Especially from a media standpoint, right? Because like you said, the accessibility is pretty much a 180 from Nick Saban. Some similarities, obviously scrimmage is closed, you expect that. But position coaches and coordinators being able to talk, obviously a wider range of players available to speak with reporters. So you do get a little bit more insight for sure. I think beyond that, the players are a little looser with what they're willing to say as well. And I think that reflects a difference in the regime as well.
Yeah. I don't know. I go back to Mike Shula, and this is still, I think, more structured than it was with Mike, because you would literally walk out there as a media member after practices some days, and you could just grab any player or coach you wanted to individually.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're seeing that with Kalen. It's still group access and those type of things. So probably not to that extent. But look, all that matters is what we're about to get into here in the next few weeks, and going to be fascinating with this football team. I wanted to ask you this too, Chase. Ryan Williams excluded. Who is the one player you're most interested to see against Western Kentucky in a couple Saturdays? Who's that one player for you? And can't pick Ryan Williams, because I know he's the easy one. Who would you go with there?
It's a great question. I'll give you Caden Proctor, right? Because he was a Jekyll and Hyde player for Alabama a year ago. Goes to Iowa, obviously, for the spring, comes back to Alabama for the summer. Looks like he's locked into that left tackle position once again. So he'll be a second-year starter for Alabama. But his performance obviously was up and down last year. More accurately, probably down and up, right? Started pretty disastrously in September, improved, got a little bit better. I thought his play was pretty solid toward mid to late season. And of course, he caught an injury before the Michigan game and struggled quite a bit against the Wolverines. So it was a roller coaster ride for him, Travis. And I'm looking forward to seeing which Caden Proctor kind of emerges. And also, and this applies to all 5 of the offensive linemen, not just Proctor, but how are they going to fit into this DeBoer offense, which is completely different from what Tommy Rees ran? These offensive linemen are going to be asked to show more athleticism. There's going to be a lot more pulling. There's going to be a lot more screen passes. They're going to be, unless DeBoer decides that he's going to, play a little bit more to the strengths of the personnel he has, which is possible. I think it's going to be interesting to see how these guys look on the hoof when they're asked to get out in space and block moving targets a little bit more than they were asked to do a year ago.
Yeah, I think we got a tip of that when you kind of looked at Washington last year and you saw Parker Brailsford at like 270 playing center.
Yeah.
I kind of told you the differences and the approaches of the two offenses, and you're absolutely right. Quick game, screen game, offensive design in general, there's going to be more asked of these offensive linemen. I think they relish it, though. I think a guy like Tyler Booker wants to show you he's more than just a grader or a mauler. Typically, big guys love it when they get out in space and pick up a DB or maybe a linebacker and really be able to lower the boom. You sort of took Caden Proctor, my guy, too, for reasons that you outlined, but also because he didn't get spring practice and he needed it. Mm-hmm. Caden Proctor needed spring practice. There are some freshmen who emerge as starting offensive linemen in year one. Guys like Cam Robinson, guys like Andre Smith, and probably going into that next spring, it wasn't as vital. I think Caden Proctor needed it, but it sounds like anyway, he's the one of those three tackles that's been in place for a few weeks now, right, as a starter. It's more about Wilkin Formby and Elijah Pritchett. So I'm going to go with the other tackle. I'm going to be interested to see, where Wilkin Formby's at, if he is that guy. And I'll say this for Wilkin all the way back to his high school days at Northridge. I've said it before here on the channel. It's a guy that it seems like every year just gets better. And how that sort of plays out. And then, I think defensively, that Husky position is going to be very interesting too, to see, first of all, who's first up, because it sounds like there's still a good bit of competition going on there with Devontae Smith, Red Morgan, a true freshman. I guess King Mack, the transfer from Penn State, could be in that mix as well. That's probably where I would lean defensively. I'm not sure about you.
Yeah, defensively for sure. The corners and the pass rushers are two obvious areas. Those are where Alabama's facing the turnover on the defensive side of the ball. They're going to be young at both spots, and so Q Robinson, does he take a big step forward as a pass rusher? That's going to be critical. We'll know a lot more about Q, I think, by the end of the Georgia game, along with a lot of other guys. And the corner spots are it can be tough on a defense to be young at corner. And the faster Alabama is able to establish a pass rush off the edge, the better off those corners are going to be, regardless of whether it's Xavier Brown or Dom Jackson, the transfer from USC, or whoever's back there.
Yeah, I'm with you on the edge guys. Keanu Coote, Quay Rusal certainly looks like he's ready to go as a second-year guy. And also how that's going to work from a package-to-package standpoint. Going back and sort of watching South Alabama with Kane Womack, didn't really see a lot of dime package. It's a lot of just 5 defensive backs and roll with it. So how they go from down to down is something that we're not probably going to learn a lot about until we get to Western Kentucky. And Western Kentucky offensively is that kind of offense anyway. Not going to have the personnel to match up with Alabama, I don't think, but in ways in which you would want to stress Alabama defensively early in the season, the Hilltoppers employ a lot of those kind of concepts. So
yeah,
I think that's something you're going to benefit from as a defense too, in terms of at least what you're going to see from Western before you get to South Florida, which will split you out, but they'll want to run the football too. And then you anticipate Wisconsin in week 3 being more traditional with Luke Fickell and its offensive approach.
Yeah, Womack's going to get 3 fairly distinctly different looks over those first 3 weeks, isn't he? I mean, you just kind of outline that. They'll be, the Hilltoppers will definitely spread them out to throw. It will be, if they get out to a lot of 4 wide and 5 wide packages, it'll be interesting to see if Alabama counters with that 6 DB. Like you said, at USA. Womack really didn't show a whole lot of that. USF last year with Byron Brown, he's back at that quarterback position. Dangerous guy running the football. So that is a little bit more spread to run kind of offense. And Wisconsin will be a different animal as well. So a pretty good smattering of attacks coming at this defense early in the year.
Yeah, a little bit of a potpourri of offensive football before you see Georgia, which, of course, is going to put some 2 tights out there, maybe even some 13 from time to time with Mike Bobo, but certainly some 11 with some capable playmakers. You don't have to worry about Brock Bowers or Ladd McConkey this time around, but the personnel is in place for Georgia to certainly be exceptional on the offensive side of the ball as well. Chase, where do you think this offense with Jalen Milroe in terms of a ceiling for it? We talked about assimilation in going from the previous regime to the new regime with Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan. I think it's a big prove it year for Jalen, maybe not so much in terms of his status and being in the job, but if he's truly a guy that wants to go to the next level, this is a great opportunity for him because everything about this offense is going to translate.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I learned working 9 years at NFL.com and talking to a lot of scouts is that they love to see college quarterbacks who are able to thrive in more than one college system because it speaks to their ability to adapt and learn and absorb. So that's the opportunity that's presented with Milroe. It is, like we said, a very different offense. And one of the things that Milroe, that is going to be demanded of Milroe in this offense that wasn't demanded quite so much last year, is getting the football out quick, get the ball out of your hand right away. Part of the issue that we saw with pass protection last year was on Jalen for holding the ball too long. Now the offensive linemen, they broke down too, so it was shared blame certainly for all the sacks,
shotgun snaps.
That too. A lot went into it. Opposing pass rushers pretty much had a field day of a season against Alabama last year, at least for the first half of the year. Got a little bit better over the second half of the year. But one of the reasons for all that is because sometimes Jalen would just hold the ball too long. That's not going to cut it in this offense. They like the ball getting out. And so I think that's one area where we could see we'll be able to recognize Jalen's development, I think, pretty quickly if we see him making quicker reads and getting the ball out quicker to receivers on some of the shorter stuff. And, like you said, it's going to be a lot more of the screen game. Alabama will throw more screen passes in their first 2 games than they threw all season last year.
No doubt. Absolutely. And the quick game. I mean, we really didn't see the quick game to the outside last year either with Jalen. So I think that's something that is going to be required of him and this offense. And it may be something he's been capable of carrying out. We just didn't see it last year. So that's going to be a big part of it, no doubt, as well.
It will. And personnel wise, obviously change at the wide receiver position. No more Jermaine Burton on the outside. He was a reliable deep threat for Milroe last year. So, Jeremy Bernard comes in from Washington. Like you said, the freshman Ryan Williams comes in, who could be pretty explosive on the outside. They need Williams, I think, to be a stretch the field, deep threat guy, even if he's not the greatest with the short stuff or going over the middle. If he can just run that go route and beat people and stretch it, even if that's his only role, he can impact things quite a bit, because I think a lot of Alabama's other receivers, while they do have some deep play capability, I think a lot of Alabama's other receivers are probably going to be more suited for, like you said, the quick game and some of those shorter throws over the middle.
Yeah, and the health of this team right now, Jaden Roberts, as we learned from his mom on social media, recently underwent a procedure. And we heard from Kalen DeBoer post-scrimmage last Saturday that he anticipates Jaden Roberts being able to go at that offensive guard position I think that's interesting because you certainly feel great about that interior trio, that first three with Jaden, Booker, and Brailsford coming in from Washington. But, you got to figure some things out from a depth perspective. I think that is where the decision to bring in an experienced guy like Gino Vandermark can look a lot better in the coming days and perhaps weeks, depending on Jaden's return. Brock Montgomery, a guy that they like to swing between guard and center. A lot of these guys, they like to get snaps at center with Chris Kapulovic. What about the health of this team? Jam Miller, I guess, been beat up a little bit too.
Jam Miller's been beat up a little bit. Like you said, Ray Roberts should be all right. And I came back from Paris with half a camp already in the books. But everything I understand is that Alabama's been pretty fortunate on the injury front, really, for the most part, throughout the month of August. And that's as critical, go ask Texas about that, right? That's as critical a factor as there is in fall camp is keeping guys upright, keeping guys healthy and ready to go.
No doubt about it. From a schedule perspective, 12-team playoff goes into effect, as we've talked about a lot in this offseason. All of us have. You look at this schedule in terms of how it sets up for Alabama. Is it optimal? Is it suboptimal? It's tough. We know that. It's going to be that way for pretty much everybody in this new SEC going forward. But in terms of how it lays out with the bye weeks and where the breaks come in before Georgia, before LSU. I mean, on paper anyway, that looks pretty good, I guess.
It does. I think it's a tough schedule, no doubt. I think Kalen DeBoer is got a lot to tackle here with this schedule. 2 bye weeks obviously is huge, although that's not everybody's got 2 bye weeks, but those are definitely well timed, I think, for this coaching staff. Georgia, obviously a huge game, September 28th in Tuscaloosa. That a lot's going to be answered on that night. Obviously, catching Oklahoma late in the year, Travis, that one's going to be on the road in Norman. Oklahoma, not a great team last year, but it'll be November might not be a great time to catch Oklahoma because the questions for Oklahoma are on the offensive line, and of course they're bringing in a first-year starter at quarterback who's a highly touted guy, right? Jackson Arnold. You would think that with those being the question marks, you'd want to catch Oklahoma early while they're still trying to figure some things out up front and offensively with a new quarterback. It could be a pretty, well-greased track for the Sooners by the time Alabama catches them. So we'll see on that one, but that won't be easy either.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about what rosters are going to look like by that weekend because, that's going to be a big weekend around the Southeastern Conference too, not just in Norman, but absolutely. That's where the big change comes in, it seems like. With Texas and Oklahoma coming into the league, you can be looking at late November and getting an OU on your schedule instead of, say, Mississippi State, which is kind of the trade it feels like in some ways Alabama is making from a schedule perspective. But, yeah, OU with Jackson Arnold, I think there was a lot of optimism in going even from Dylan Gabriel, who moved on to Oregon, to Jackson Arnold. I think Jackson Arnold has shown a little bit of a propensity to turn the football over. But to your point, by the time Alabama gets there in the 11th game of the regular season, maybe he's got some of those things worked out. The game has slowed down for him enough to be able to do what he needs to do. Let's talk about just newcomer overall. And again, Ryan Williams, we know.
Right.
But whether it's a transfer portal, because I'll say this for Kalen DeBoer and the staff, no rock unturned seemed to be the approach when it came to the portal because I thought they were successful in keeping that class together for the most part. Obviously, there were some major departures, not only in terms of guys that even practiced in bowl practice and Julian Sayin at the quarterback position, some other guys that decided to move on. Downs moves on as a returning player via the transfer portal. But is this roster in its totality, given everything, the upheaval upon Saban's Saban's retirement. Is it better than you thought it would be at this point, or is it about what you thought, or maybe not quite up to it?
No, it's about what I thought it would be. I think it certainly could have been worse. I think on the whole, Kalen DeBoer held things together pretty well, and I think a couple of assistants that he retained had a lot to do with that. Right, Freddie Roach, Gillespie, the running backs coach, a handful of players. Milroe, Booker, Malachi Moore, right out of the gate said, "Hey, we're going to hold this thing together." A lot of credit, I think, goes to some of those people, but the recruiting obviously is held up, and even beyond the signees that are coming into play here in 2024. What DeBoer's been able to do to build the 25 class, I think, has been real impressive. That's been you at the top of the show, you were asking, how's he done, even though he hadn't coached a game yet. I would point to that before I would point to anything.
And I see there his GM, Courtney Morgan, is going to get an amended deal. And,
yes.
He's been great too. Cold summer it has been for Alabama on the recruiting trail. What's crazy about it, though, Goodbread, and you know this because we go back to the early 90s when it comes to college football recruiting coverage, is that back in the day, and really this was the case even 4 or 5 years ago, you'd have all the official visits December, but mostly January. And then right after that, as you really racked up your commitments, you got them signed that first Wednesday in February. June felt like January used to feel like.
Right.
Except you can't sign any of these kids until December.
Right.
So now you got to still get them to December. You got NIL now, obviously, but I agree. I think with everything taken into account, and I think there's still some good news likely coming Alabama's way, perhaps on the offensive side of the ball here in the near future. The roster is beyond what I anticipated. I didn't think it would totally fall apart, but I think the retention was good. And I think, again, I give a lot of credit to this staff too. It wasn't just like, well, any of the Washington guys we can get to come along, like Jeremy Bernard and Austin Mack and Parker Brailsford and Josh Cuevas. Okay, we'll bring them along. No, they didn't stop there. Where the portal got Keon Sabb, King Mack,
Graham Nicholson.
When you start bringing in transfer kickers, that tells me you're serious about your personnel.
Yeah.
And obviously he's the reigning Lou Groza Award winner, but even guys like Cameron Howard, Deshaun Jones, I mean, they dug deep where the portal is concerned to not just take this first year as sort of a transitional year. And if we lose 3 games, no. It told me something about the wiring of Kalen DeBoer. Kalen DeBoer is coming in here thinking, no, it's not. We're gonna maintain this thing or do our damnedest to try to.
Yeah. And also, don't forget a couple of the, some of the transfers came in before Saban retired, right? Yeah. LT Overton, the Damani Jackson, come USC. Those guys could have bolted. Those guys could have flown the coop as soon as Saban left, because that portal window opened right back up for 30 days for those guys too. And they could have left after the spring as well. And considering those guys signed on to play for Saban, you would have thought that would have been a risk, but DeBoer was able to hold on to that bunch as well. And, the reports we're getting, Travis, is that LT Overton is looking good on that defensive line, put some weight on. I think Texas A&M tried to make him a trim down pass rusher, and at Alabama, he's packed some weight back on and likes it.
Yeah, he and Jamarian Latham could be a nice duo. And then, of course, Keon Keeley, you're developing into that type of role too as a young player. Luke here in our show chat, Chase, let's go to him. Thanks for tuning in, Luke, and thanks for everyone else who is participating in the show chat. If you'd like to drop a question, a comment, we will certainly get to that before the end of the show. Luke asks or says, it's August, so I only live in positivity land. I like that, Luke. What concern about this team is most likely to be unfounded and or overblown? the concern that people are talking about a lot, Chase, that you think may not be as big of a concern once this season gets going?
Probably the lack of experience at wide receiver, Travis. That's part of the talk that Alabama is relatively green at that position. I don't expect that to be a huge issue, really. I think Bernard brings in more experience than most of these guys. Ryan Williams, I think, is going to come in and at least make some impact, if not be a I've never predicted a true freshman is going to be a star before I've seen him play. I just don't do that. But I will not at all be surprised if Williams is in the rotation and making a difference. I think Kendrick Law is a guy who's primed for a big year. Kobe Prentice is a solid player who saw a decent bit of action last year. You add it all up, I think Alabama is going to be all right at that wide receiver position, maybe better than people think. But I don't see it being a hole by any stretch of the imagination.
I'll go with there's been so much talk about the secondary, and I think it is founded to have concern because you're looking at, in your base defense of 5 defensive backs, the possibility of having 4 newcomers to your program as your starters of your 5. Malachi Moore perhaps being the only exception. Maybe Devontae Smith will also be a starter back there at the Husky position or somewhere in that 5. But they certainly have a lot of capable guys. And I think the way that they're going to play, like, I don't think it's going to be as much as like what you would have asked of these guys under Nick Saban, not just in man coverage more either. I don't think they're going to play as much man coverage, which you can still bust zones too, right? If you're not getting that right. But I think it's going to be more, player friendly in terms of being able to jump in and just play and play fast. And so I would probably go with the secondary there more than anything. We've got the Gump Dumpster checking in, Chase, says secondary has a lot of talent but lack of experience. Yeah, I agree with you, GD. Donald Andrews checking in here. Do you think there is one side of the ball that will have to sort of carry this team at least early on, Chase?
I don't. Some years, a lot of years, I've felt that way about some of Nick Saban's vast teams. I don't see that. I think it's going to have to be give and take. I think they're going to need both sides to deliver. Now, if the offensive line struggles with some of the stuff they're going to run that's going to demand more athleticism, then yeah, maybe the defense is going to have to be a little bit better than expected. The flip side of that is if Alabama struggles to get to the quarterback off the edge, they struggle at the corner spots, then that'll put more pressure on the offense. But I'm not looking ahead seeing one side as a dominant side.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think special teams might be able to carry them too if it needs to. We talk offense, defense, but you bring in Nicholson, the Lou Groza Award winner from a year ago from Miami of Ohio. You bring back James Burnip, who should be an absolute weapon, should be in his J.K. Scott era, maybe, as a punter. And then you have a roster that is talented enough that should be able to fill in the gaps in terms of your coverage and return units. So I'm with you. I think at least in terms of just talent, it seems to be a pretty balanced roster right now that Kalen DeBoer is going to get things going in Tuscaloosa with.
How about the early part of the schedule, Travis, versus the back end? We talked about Wisconsin being a road game, I guess, coming up. That'll be week 3. Georgia after that. That'll be no fun closing out September. Toward the back end, obviously you get Oklahoma back there. You get Auburn, which of course be a home game for Alabama. I think it's pretty balanced overall. If you look at some of these schedules, and especially with this new 16-team SEC, you see some big differences, right? I mean, you look at Florida's schedule. Florida's got a monster schedule, but it's so backloaded, right? Go look at Florida's November. It's unbelievable. They're they got 5 games in November, because I guess there's 5 weekends in November this year. And those 5 teams are all ranked in the top 12 preseason, including number 1 Georgia, including number 4 Texas. That's just a brutal stretch. I think Alabama's schedule, it's a tough one, but I think the toughness of it is at least kind of spread out from start to finish a little bit.
It is. I mean, Florida could start out 6-1 and finish 6-6. Really could, with those final 5 games, starting with the cocktail party in Duval. And look, even those first 7 or so aren't going to be easy. They open with Miami in what should be just a brutally hot weather game in Gainesville. That's a 3:30 Eastern kickoff for the Gators and the Canes. That's a big game for Mario Cristobal too. In that season opener. But absolutely, Florida, it's brutal. I agree. I think Alabama, schedule-wise, I think it sets up nicely, and so you can certainly test yourself, but still continue to evaluate into the season, because, we've heard that from Coach Cap, offensive line coach for Alabama, about that right tackle position. That's one example of, look, this thing might go into Western Kentucky or even South Florida before you go to Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin, you'd like to go to Madison feeling like we kind of know who our first guys are. And then depending on how that goes up at Camp Randall, you have the bye week to come into after that before Georgia. And then if you need to tweak a little bit of a NASCAR pit stop before you take on the Dogs, you can work with that. So, I think it does set up nicely. I know a lot of people are really high on Missouri. I like Brady Cook. I like Luther Burden. I like the receivers in general. I don't like that they're going through a pretty significant change on the defensive side of the ball, not just in terms of personnel, but their coordinator, Blake Baker, is now at LSU.
Right.
I think the trip to Tennessee won't be easy. I think actually the 2 trips between Tennessee and Baton Rouge will tell a lot of the story for this Alabama team, how they navigate that 2-game sort of road stretch there from mid-October into early November. And you said it earlier, Norman won't be a treat in late November, but if they can get through Knoxville and Baton Rouge, and with both of those games in their back pocket, I mean, they should be able to go into the rest of the month of November feeling pretty good about 10-2 at a minimum, and 10-2 with a 12-team playoff. That should put you where you want to be, right?
If you're playing an SEC schedule and you're 10-2, you're in.
You're in. Yeah. So, you might be playing a first round game, maybe on the road, maybe not, but you're in. And that's going to be where it all starts moving forward.
It's going to be a good Tennessee team. I'm a little bit wait and see on LSU. They may be good. They may be not great. I don't know, but that Tennessee team, I think is primed for a pretty big year under Josh Heupel.
They're feeling good about Nico jumping in there at quarterback. I've heard a lot of hype about their defensive line with Amari Thomas and the James Pierce and the guys that they bring back there on that front. It seems like Tennessee in the secondary has been bad for about 20 years now. So we'll see how that sort of comes together. Offensively with Heupel, you expect them to still be very potent. I agree. I think with LSU, it's still going to be about that defense, even bringing Bo Davis in with the defensive line, making the change at coordinator. I still don't know from a personnel perspective if they're quite back to that level yet. It's crazy though, because you say all that about LSU and then you look at their defensive line from last year and they had 3 guys go in the NFL draft from their defensive line: Mekhi Wingo, Mason Smith, and Jordan Jefferson. Man, those guys were all drafted and they were terrible on defense.
Are you a Nussmeier guy?
I'm in on Garrett Nussmeier. I'm on the Nuss bus, I guess you can say.
Nice.
I think that opener with SC is going to be fascinating, though, because I think Miller Moss, who was just named the starter for SC today, is kind of the Nussmeier of SC. He's kind of the forgotten guy, waited his turn. Caleb obviously moves on. I think that's going to be a fun game in Vegas, man. I think there's going to be a lot of points and ball's going to go up and down the field. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's kind of the way I'm thinking.
the position that Nussmeier's in, to me, reminds me a little bit of the position Mac Jones was in at Alabama before his last season. And what I mean by that is Mac Jones and Nussmeier, neither one of them were regular starters until that last year, but both of them got a lot of reps, a lot of throws leading into that as backups, right? I mean, Nussmeier, he started a few games, played in a bowl game. He's piled up a lot of passes at LSU for a guy who's never been the guy before. And kind of similar to Mac Jones that way, because remember, Tua blew so many teams out at Alabama that Mac Jones was playing a lot of second halves, throwing a lot of footballs. And, of course, he had to finish the year when Tua got hurt against Mississippi State, ended up taking over the starting role and going against Michigan in that bowl game. So, Nussmeier's, he's never been the true number one at LSU, but he's thrown a lot of balls.
And I think like Mac, he's got a lot of self-confidence, and that can go a long way. I think what also helps is he may be playing behind the best offensive line in college football.
That helps.
So that helps. And even with Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., those guys moving on, Kyron Lacey coming back, when I think wide receivers and running backs, and I know there's questions about the running back position at LSU too, I don't even hear that. It's like, what do you expect LSU to always have at this point?
Yeah.
Next guy's up at wide receiver, running back, secondary. That's where they need next guys up more than anywhere. It sounds crazy to say it, but till they get some things just sort of connected, they were so disconnected on defense last year. It wasn't that they didn't have players. They were uncoordinated. It was amazing to see teams and offenses just do what they did to that defense.
Especially a Brian Kelly team.
Yeah.
I thought, but no doubt some struggles there last year for the Tigers.
It was BK, but he didn't have it his way on defense last year.
No, he didn't.
Hey, BK, let us know something. There you go. We got you.
We got a little bit of overtime here, Travis, but we probably owed him that, right?
After a few months off. Yeah, we took a little break, so absolutely. We had to get caught up, and we still got a lot to get into. I mean, next week we've got game week. That'll certainly keep us busy as we really ramp things up here on the show. And you know what? I mean, hoops. We're going to have these shows where at this point they're going to be football, basketball shows.
Yeah.
Nate Oates, man. I mean, it's crazy, but that's where we're at. And I think Alabama fans wouldn't have it any other way.
He's put together a pretty phenomenal roster for next year. I don't think there's any doubt about it. A lot fewer questions. I mean,
now it's all about expectations.
Right.
It's like Final Four or bust. Now that it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's tough because you can have the best team, but if you don't get the best draw, it's hard. It's kind of like football now. Everybody's like, well, it's going to be easier to get in the playoff. Well, exactly. Yeah, 12 teams, but it's going to be harder to win it once you get in the playoff now.
Yeah. Yeah, going to be fun. All right. Well, I guess that'll wrap us up, right, Travis, here on the Talkin' Tide podcast. Glad to have our listeners and viewers back once again. Stick around. Looking forward to doing more Talkin' Tide this fall.